Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Tuesday Bible Talks. I'm your host, Keith Farron, and I love having these conversations. Bible Talks are all about talking about the Bible. So connecting the Bible to everyday life. And sometimes we're exploring a theme or a topic. Sometimes we're looking at a Bible study methodology, or I'll talk to musicians who write songs based on scripture, or artists, or you name it, all things Bible. That's what we are about here on Bible Talk. So if that sounds interesting to you, whether you are on Facebook, if you are on Facebook, you are going to want to go to StreamYard.com/Facebook so we can see your comments. And if you're on YouTube, you're going to want to click that subscribe link and a little bell so that you are reminded each time we go live or post a new Bible Talk. So today I'm excited to welcome my new friend, Hunter Williams. Thanks for coming on the show, Hunter.
Absolutely. So glad to be here.
Yeah, good to have you. And so I know that you are an Awana missionary in Tennessee. And so tell us a little bit more about what you do, how you started doing that, and your family and all that good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a dad of three. So I've got three amazing kids. I've got Margot, who's 4, Clark, who's 2, and then Opal, who's 9 months old. And my wife's name is Sammy. And we're all things kids ministry, So I work with Awana, and I serve as a missionary here in Tennessee. I live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is amazing right now. It's like in the 60s here. So perfect place to live if you're
Okay, we might have to end this early because I'm in Seattle where it is not 60.
Yeah. Sorry to shove that in your face. But so yeah, no, we love living here, love ministry here. And I've been working with Awana for about a little over a year and a half, and just been blessed by how God led us here. It wasn't on my radar at the time to work with Awana. And then I had a mutual friend reach out and said I'd be a good fit. And so just thankful for what we get to do. Some people ask me, what does it mean to be an Awana missionary? And, missionary can kind of throw people off. I kind of like to use the term child discipleship advocate because that's what I'm doing. When I go to churches or meet with leaders, I'm advocating both for a higher view of children in the church, but also elevating the quality of discipleship they're receiving in the church and in the home. And so absolutely love it. Get to love doing things like this where I get to meet friends in ministry and talk about these things. And so, yeah, just thankful to be on here and for the conversation today.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I've done a lot of different things with Awana over the years and at your conferences, and even had a chance to remember. I don't know if you've been in long enough to know the 11 Ways books. Do you remember the 11 Ways books? So I partnered with them to write one of those books that was handed out to a lot of your leaders and stuff. So cool. Love that. Well, yeah, 11 Ways to Help Kids Fall in Love with the Bible. So there you go. Awesome. That was really, really fun. So that's my connection to Awana. Because growing up, when I was growing up, where I was living, we didn't have Awana. I mean, I wasn't aware of Awana until I was an adult. And so I've loved partnering with Awana for years on kind of anything that I can. So thank you for the way that you're serving kids. So
yeah, absolutely.
So today, when you and I connected, and I heard about your passion, because with Awana we could talk a whole lot. We could talk about Bible memory. We could talk about we could talk about working with churches and partnering with homes, and we could talk about a whole lot of different things. But you started talking as you and I were emailing back and forth. You were talking about worldview. And this idea of what our worldview is, and I'm like, I want to hone in on that, and maybe I'll have you back on another thing, and we can talk about some of these other myriad topics we could talk through. But today it's going to be all about worldview. So we better get a good definition of what is a worldview. So I'm gonna put that up there and let you run. So what is a worldview? So we're all on the same page as we talk for the next 6 hours about worldview.
Yeah, we definitely could. But I think it's good to start with a definition, because you can read different books on worldview. They'll say similar things. People might have their own way of wording it. And so I have my own way of wording it. And to explain how I get to my definition, I usually share a story.
Okay.
So growing up, my uncle owned a skating rink. And
Okay.
so a lot of my childhood was spent at the skating rink, not only skating, but also playing in the arcade. He had a huge wall of arcade games that went along the rink. And I mastered all of them because I'm going there every night, there on the weekends a lot of times. And so I'm mastering all these games. But there was one game that I couldn't master at all. And it was the toy claw machine. And if you've ever played one, you know that they're rigged, right? I didn't know this as a kid, though. So as a kid, I'm like, why can I not win this every time I play? I'm winning like once every 20 tries and blowing all my money. And I'm like, what's going on? And, I was thinking maybe my timing was off. I thought maybe I wasn't hitting the buttons correctly. But as I got older, I learned that it didn't really have anything to do with how I was operating it or the buttons I was pressing. It had everything to do with the system within the game. So the system inside of the claw machine game determined the grip in the game. And so it would determine what toys it could pick up or what toys it couldn't bear the weight of. And, as I think about that, I think that that's a perfect way to think through worldview, because a worldview is a system of belief inside of you that determines your grip on reality. And depending on that system of belief inside of you, these basic beliefs in you, it will determine how you can handle certain situations, or if your worldview can bear the weight of issues that arise in your life. And so worldview, my definition that I've come up with is a worldview is a system of belief that determines your grip on reality. And I just think that is
I'm gonna type that. So I'm gonna stop you here. I'm gonna type that down. So a worldview is a system. Go ahead.
Of belief. System of belief that determines your grip on reality.
Okay. I'm gonna put that. A system of a worldview is a system of belief that determines your grip on reality. I love that, and I did not know. I mean, I knew that I've never won the claw game. I didn't realize that it was rigged like a slot machine or whatever. So,
yeah.
Somebody owes me quarters. So,
that's right. That's right.
Either that or a big stuffy animal, whatever. So, a system of belief that determines your grip on it. So, okay. So now we got that definition, the system of belief that determines your grip on reality. And so why does your worldview matter then? So why is it important to understand what it is and to even have this conversation? Why is our conversation today important?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked this, because a lot of times I think when people hear worldview, they think academics, they think college, they think apologetics. And yes, worldview is definitely part of all those arenas. But the thing is, we all have a worldview. What I just described, every single human being alive, including children, has a worldview. They have a system of belief that is determining their grip on reality and how they take hold of issues of life. Mm-hmm. And so the reason this is so important is because your worldview impacts everything you do in your world. So the way you view the world determines how you live in the world and the decisions you make. And so that's why I wanted to, I think it's good that we're having this conversation, because anyone listening right now, even if they're not a Christian, they have a worldview. There's something that is driving their decisions. There's that system of belief that's driving what they prioritize, what they value, what they think is influential, what they follow. Everything in their world and how they function is based out of those pre-commitments, that system of belief that's inside of who they are.
Okay. So just so everybody knows, when you see me go over here and you hear my typing or whatever, I'm taking notes. I'm taking notes here because it's all fascinating to me. My email is closed. I'm not like over here.
It's not multitasking. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, I'm editing a video of it. No. So, okay. So the last thing I typed down, how you view the world determines how you live in the world. So, So how do you even, I want to look at the influencers of a worldview and how you cultivate that, where I want to get to that. But how do you even ascertain like what your worldview is? Is there a way that you evaluate what your worldview is, or even kind of start to examine it yourself and if that goes into our conversation, because we as we were talking about beforehand, that idea of what the influencers are of a worldview. So if it dovetails into that, that's fine. But I'm just kind of thinking, how do you even know what your worldview is? Well, what's my worldview?
That's perfect. So there's a few ways we could go about this. So what I gave you was a broad definition, right? So it's a system of belief that determines your grip on reality. So what's that system? What are the elements? So if we're thinking, I use claw machine as my kind of overarching analogy for this. So what's the pieces, the mechanism inside of you that determines how you play or operate in this life? And, as I was trying to think of a very simplified way to talk about this, I actually think the words of Jesus are very helpful here. So if you're looking at John chapter 14 in the beginning, Jesus is talking about that he's going to go prepare a place for us. And Thomas says, well, we don't know the way. How will we know the way? What is the way to this place you're preparing? And Jesus says, actually, you do know the way. I'm the way. Right. And then you get this beautiful statement Jesus says in John chapter 14, verse 6. He says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. And what Jesus does there, it's very powerful. He's actually making a worldview statement. So he says three things in there, and I think these actually make up three core elements of a worldview.
Okay.
One, Jesus says, I'm the way. Now, when he's saying I'm the way, he's saying I'm the way to the Father, the way to the place I prepare for you. But also tied up in that way is the way you live on the way to the Father. So it's this way of life, right? And so I would say that a first part of a worldview has to have a way you live, or what you might say morality or ethics or right and wrong. So a worldview has to be able to answer these questions as far as what defines right and wrong, how is it measured, and what is its standard for measurement, right? Every worldview system, whether it's Christianity, Islam, a secular worldview, whatever it is, it has to be able to define what this way of life is, what morality is. So that's one. Jesus says, I'm the way. Okay. Then he says, I'm the truth. And so every worldview has to be able to define what truth is. What is truth and how can you know it? In philosophy, this idea of knowledge, that's epistemology. How do you come to know what you know? And how do you know that you know it? Right. So basically, what we're talking about here is answering questions like, is truth absolute? Is it relative? Can truth even be known? Are we in a place to know truth? How do we know if something is true? So every worldview, one has to answer the way, your way of living. Two, it has to answer what is the truth and what do you hold to that? And then three is the life. So Jesus says he's the way, the truth, and the life. And this idea of the life, this is a life Jesus gives. So it's not only just talking about the gift of eternal life, but he's also talking also about the meaning of life. Because this life Christ gives us has a very specific purpose. It's to the glory of God, right? And so a worldview also has to answer this question of what is the point of life? What's the purpose? What's the meaning in all of our experiences? And so to me, those are the three parts of the belief system that you have to be able to answer in order to get a good grip on reality. What's the way, what's the truth, and what's the life? And I tell you what, that's such an easy way to keep that in mind when you're having conversations with people. I use it all the time when talking with believers or non-believers about, okay, so here's what you say you believe. What does that say about your morality, your truth, and your meaning? And man, you can even talk about this with kids too, and you'd be surprised even how young kids could understand this. So
yeah, I love that. You can say the way you live, the truth you hold, the life you have, but that morality, truth, and meaning, I think that's simplified way of having this conversation. And I think it's analogies, whether it's the claw analogy or whatever. I think that thinking in terms of, you can have a conversation about worldview and get deep into, apologetics and how we can test it and all that kind of stuff. But when I hear something like the claw analogy, people can get it. And same thing when I'm talking to people about studying the Bible. I'm like, you like movies? I like movies too, but I like to watch the movie before I study the scenes. I don't want to talk about a scene of a movie I've never seen because it's just academic. Same with the Bible. I kind of use that and say the problem with our Bible study is we study the Bible like we're studying the scenes of a movie we've never watched. And so I think that those analogies, can really, really help. And people who aren't even Christians have heard that the way, the truth, and the life. They've seen it on billboards, or they've seen it wherever. And so, hey, that the guy Jesus that said that, and here's how I think about it in terms of how I view the world, right?
Yeah.
The way you live, the truth you hold, the life you have. And I love that. Okay. So we've laid this foundation with kind of understanding and evaluating it. So what would you say? I know that I've seen some of your kind of almost more formal presentation on this, and I know you say there are several different primary influencers, whether it be on us adults or as some people are watching this or going to be watching the recording and they're thinking about, okay, I've got to think about my kids as well. So what would you say are the main influencers of a worldview, whether it's adults or kids?
Yeah, because it's like we said earlier, everyone has a worldview. And I can't remember who said this quote, but someone said a lot of people, they have a worldview and don't realize they have it. It's like a cold. They just catch it. They don't know how they got it. They just have it. And so it's helpful to recognize the main influencers of a worldview so you can understand, oh, here's why I make the decisions that I do. Here's why I value the things that I value, because this is what's being presented to me as what I need to value. And so so I kind of have a top 4 that I give when I do the kind of this talk or presentation. And number 1 that I give people is the home, is your family. And no matter how that family looks, it could be mom, dad, child, it could be grandparents, child, whatever the makeup of that family is, that home, that unit, that has the primary push for what someone believes. Because that makes sense, right? If you're living with someone, you're going to pick up on what they value. You're going to pick up on their norms. You're going to pick up on what they prioritize. And then that in turn is going to internalize in you. And that's going to shape how you view the world. Basically, we see how others see the world and we adopt it. And so home has a big influence. So if there's parents watching this, even if you think your kid doesn't care a lick about what you do, they are absorbing it. There's this phrase in discipleship that says a lot of times more is caught than taught.
Right.
And there is truth to that, because even if you're not having deep conversations, them evaluating and seeing your habits and your rhythms in life, that's shaping them. So that's number 1 is home. Absolutely. And number 2 is school. And this makes sense for us because if you think about it, they spend like 8 hours a day at school. I think I saw a number somewhere that the average child spends 16,000 hours in school. Just think about that, 16,000 hours. If you spend 16,000 hours in anything, that's going to shape who you are, no matter what it is. And so school, though, is multifaceted because 1, school is shaping you by the teachers and what's being taught. But 2, it's also how your peers are in school. Your friends are there too. So all those hours at school is being shaped by the curriculum, the teachers, and your friends that are there. So it's there's a lot that influences at school. Number 3 would be social media. And that one's pretty obvious to us in the world we live in. But I don't think people realize how pervasive social media is, because I think the average child spends 6+ hours a day on social media. And then the average middle and high schooler spends 9+ hours a day. And for some, it's much more than that. And so if you think about it, if you're on anything for 6 to 10 hours a day, that's going to shape who you are.
Yeah. And just to pause here for a second, for somebody who's watching this and thinks there's no way.
Yeah.
I want to tell you, I had a conversation in the last 2 weeks with a guy who is a college student, a Christian guy at a Christian university. We were having a conversation about social media, and he said that he has gotten his social media use down. Now, I don't know that, I guess he was talking about just screen time. So he was talking about everything from playing music to interacting with his screen. That he had gotten it down from 12 hours to 8. And he just felt like kind of a weight had been lifted, kind of a thing. So yeah,
I think screen time is a good way to put that.
I don't know if you know Bill. I'm spending about 30 minutes or so on social media watching this discussion.
That's not to say all consumption of social media is bad, but what Bill is awesome.
That is so awesome.
I'm glad he's on the chat. I love that guy.
Definitely, there is the blessing and the curse of it for sure. There's the rabbit hole. Oh my goodness! I just spent the last 6 days not coming up from my TikTok coma to, to people using it to spread the gospel. So I mean, certainly there's the blessing and the curse, but the reality is that screen time is, for adults and kids, is a big influencer on life for sure.
Yeah, and it's just coming to terms with that. And again, I'm not saying all social media use is wrong. Some people will say we need to neglect it or get rid of it. I say just it's all about curation, thinking through how we use it. And now there may be some of us, we need to dial down how much we use, but also for some of us, it can be, how can I use this for the glory of God? Because I mean, there's so many great opportunities, just like what we're doing now, to have conversations that can shape somebody in a God glorifying way. So
absolutely.
Yeah. And then so that's the first three. So home, school, social media. The fourth one is church. And I remember the first time I presented this, someone was kind of frustrated that I put church at number 4. And now what I had to clarify was, this doesn't mean that this is the order of their importance or any. What I'm saying is, as far as we're looking at time and what is really shaping us, because the way I had to break it down was this, when that person that questioned me on this, I said, if you look at it, there's around 170 hours in a week. The average person spends maybe 1 hour a week, or honestly 1.7 hours a month in church. Okay. So let's just look at a week. Let's say someone goes to church 1 hour a week. Now, that's great. They have that 1 hour that's precious, but think of the other 160 plus hours in that week. The question is, what's filling that time in that 160 plus hours? Because that's going to have the biggest push of influence, most likely in their life. And so that the only reason church is 4 is more so because of time, not in importance. So I want to clarify that, because someone asked me on that. But those are the 4 I give. And it's helpful to have those 4 to think through, okay, what does this look like in our life? What does our home life look like? What does school look like? Social media usage in our church. How are all those things working in our lives, and how can we elevate them to shape us in better ways? And so, and along with those 4 things, I think you and I were talking, I have what's called the 4 W's of influence.
Okay.
And they're reflection questions I give people to help them think through the use of their time.
Okay.
So if they want to think through, if time is a big part of what influences us, what we give our time to. So I give these 4, I'll just throw these out here quickly, because I know we're already at almost 25 minutes, but just to throw these out for people to think through. So first one is who do you spend the most time with? Because who you spend the most time with will influence you. Second question is what do you do on a consistent basis? What are your habits and your rhythms? Because that's going to shape you. Third question is where do you spend your free time? And I think free time is key, because what we do with our free time actually shows a lot about who we are, because that's what we're going to for rest and comfort and identity and all those things. And then the last question is why do you spend your time the way that you do? And I think those 4 questions alone, when you think about the use of your time, can show you, 1, the worldview you're operating out of, but 2, what things are influencing your worldview. So yeah. So
do those questions then answer some of that, how you cultivate that, or is that are those kind of transition questions into, because I'd love to wrap up our time with with if a individual that's watching this is wanting to develop a biblical Christian worldview, or they're a parent who's wanting to make sure that they're instilling that, how do we cultivate that? I mean, part of it is the evaluation of asking these questions, but
Yeah.
I'd love to also hear from you of, how do we cultivate this? How do we cultivate a biblical Christian worldview?
Yeah, and I think, like what you said, part of it is evaluation, because there's something I talk about with worldviews. So if we're using that claw machine analogy, I say we can do something called part stealing, where without realizing it, a Christian can steal parts from the secular worldview and not realize they're doing it.
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking things that really aren't from a biblical worldview. Because what can happen, and again, we don't realize this happens, is we can claim one thing, but actually live out of a different worldview. We do that all the time. And it can happen on both sides. You can have a person who comes from a secular worldview claim things that really only work if they are pulling from the Christian worldview. So, for example, when you talk about this idea of human dignity and equality, a lot of secular worldview, they'll push for that. But then the question is, well, where do you even get that from? If we're all just happenstance that's created with no purpose, we're not endowed with human dignity. That's not inherent in us. Now, that makes sense in the Christian worldview because we're made in the image of God. So it happens on both sides where people steal from other worldviews. And one thing I push people to think through is a lot of this evaluation is a good worldview is a consistent worldview. So if we're thinking that claw machine analogy,
I like that.
The only way a worldview can have a true grip on reality and bear the weight of the issues of life is if the system is completely working in tune. So that's why I love the Christian worldview. When you look at it across the board, across the system, it's consistent. It has answers to objective morality, which is God's character. It has answers to objective truth, which is God's word. And it has answers to a purpose of life, which is God's plan. And so it's so consistent and it can bear the issues of life. Where if you were to pull up other worldviews, that's why I like using the way, the truth, and the life. If you were to look at other worldviews, a lot of times the morality is preference, the truth is opinion, and the purpose is relative. And when you have things that are very subjective like that, it's going to come up with issues that it can't bear the weight of. Like in that claw machine, when it looks like it picks up the toy and then drops it, that's what happens in other worldviews. They're presented with an issue in life that on the surface, it seems like they have an answer, but then the system can't bear the weight.
Right.
And so, so that's why these conversations are so key. And honestly, asking good questions is powerful to a worldview. So if I'm talking to someone who's not a Christian, instead of me instantly just talking to them up front, I ask a lot of questions.
For sure.
Because then once they've laid out their way, their truth, and their life, I could say, well, wait a minute. The way you describe the way doesn't work with the way you describe the truth. And it gets people thinking that, wow, my worldview is not consistent, or I'm stealing parts from another worldview. And just makes for powerful conversations. And honestly, I say the best apologetics is the apologetics that knows the word of God. Knows the word of God backwards and forwards. And so, but yeah, so that's something I would say as far as, cultivating it is asking good questions, evaluating what you're living for, what you're striving towards. This might be helpful. So I've got a few questions I give people to think through as far as their worldview they're operating out of. And maybe I'll end with this. So here's some questions for the listener to think through as they're trying to think, well, what if I say I'm a Christian, but I'm not living out of a Christian worldview? How can I know? And so here's some questions to think through. One, what am I living for? What am I striving after? Because in the Christian worldview, we live for and strive after the glory of God and what he's called us to do. He's called us to go make disciples and to share the gospel.
Okay.
Another question, what do I run to for answers? Who or what do I look to for help? Again, as believers, the Christian worldview, the Bible is the standard, period, for truth in all things of life. And so if you're running to social media influencers or this or that for these big answers of life, it shows that you're not grounding what you're thinking through in scripture. Another question, what motivates my decisions? And that's a huge one. A lot of us, we just make very reactionary decisions without stopping to think, why did I make that decision? Was that a biblically based decision, or did I just make it because that's what felt right or seemed normal? And we're seeing that a lot, especially in today's culture of things being decided. And then last question, who or what has the greatest amount of influence in your life? Because if you can figure out what's influencing you most and see what they believe or what their worldview is, that can be a good tell of what you're shaping as your worldview. So I know those are a lot of questions, and people may have to go back and replay.
Yeah,
this
may be one. This may be one to rewind different parts for sure.
Yeah, I know it's a lot of content, but again, worldview, to me, it's one of the most important things a person can talk about, because like we said in the beginning, it influences literally everything in your life. So it's important to think through.
For sure. So if somebody wanted to go deeper, because obviously we've talked for 32 minutes about a topic that we could talk for hours about, and the people have written about. So I know that, because as we were talking beforehand, I know that you've even got some books that you recommend. What, hold up some of those, and what would be the resources that if somebody wanted to dig deeper, wanted to explore this topic more, what would you recommend?
Yeah. So as far as just talking about worldview, there's a couple that come to mind that they put it on the lower shelf. It's really easy to dive into. The first couple I'll tell you are specifically for if you're wanting to share a worldview with kids or teenagers. Okay. Biblical Worldview by Josh Mulvihill. He's a good friend. He's actually on the board of directors at Awana. His ministry is phenomenal. He works with Renew a Nation, and his ministry is all about equipping families to raise kids with biblical worldviews. And so good resource. I pulled some stuff from his book when I was preparing my presentation. Another good book is called Mama Bear Apologetics. I have a digital copy of that, so I can't show it to you.
Right.
But Mama Bear Apologetics is good because it takes issues that are current right now, just modern issues that are hitting our world, and says, okay, how can we look at these modern issues from a biblical lens? And it just does a good job at helping you cultivate a biblical worldview in that way. Now, for adults or anyone kind of their first time jumping into this, one author I think does a great job. He's brilliant, but he does a good job at breaking this down. His name is James Anderson, and he's got one book I just read that I loved. It's called Why Should I Believe Christianity? But in that book, the intro chapter is all about worldview. And he just does a very great job of breaking it down in simple terms. And it's a very short book. He's also got a book on worldview. The title escapes me. It's What is a Worldview or something like that. But James Anderson, both books are short, really easy to get into. Man, I'm trying to think. There's so many resources I could point you to. Now, as far as resources from Awana, but just because I know those resources well because I work with them. Actually, I'll give you one more. And then I'll tell you Awana resources. I'm a reader, so it's bad. When you ask me resources, it's really bad.
Yeah. What are your 75 favorite books?
Yeah. Faithfully Different. This just came out like 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
And basically, I would recommend it. Basically, what she does in this book, Natasha Crane, she's talking about how biblical worldview is at odds with the current secular worldview. And she talks about the differences and how to live a biblical worldview out faithfully in light of today's culture. It's good, and she's a really easy read. Great writer. So as far as two books from Awana, or two things I would highlight, one is Resilient. This is a book that came out a couple of years ago. Yeah. And the reason I mentioned this one is in the first couple of chapters, we kind of paint a picture of reality of where our kids are. And I actually quoted
a copy of it over here.
Yeah. And I quoted some stats from this in our talk. So this is it's really easy to read. It's got good stories, statistics, and things like that. And in light of that, we have something called the Child Discipleship Forum. And at the forum, and this is open to anybody, you don't have to have a Awana curriculum or anything to come to this. The goal of the forum is just to get leaders together to talk about shaping the future of the church. And we've got all kinds of good speakers coming to this. We've got Rebecca McLaughlin, she's an apologist, and she's going to be talking about apologetics and culture. Andy Crouch, who's a really big guy on culture. Carl Trueman, who's probably written one of the greatest books ever on how we got to where we are today. So just a lot of good stuff. So the Child Discipleship Forum, you can go on Awana's website and learn about that. Yeah. And then
I know that I just want to end with, I know that there's something we did not time this so that it would happen, but as you and I were talking before we hit live, you said there's a site that Awana has developed that literally went live today.
Yeah, it did. It was perfect.
So I'm gonna share the screen. Tell us what we're seeing here.
Yeah. So briefly, Awana, we're mostly known for Awana clubs, but Awana's heartbeat is to make resilient child disciples, both in the church and in the home. And we do that through leadership training. We do that through conferences, and we do that through curriculum. But what Awana wanted to do was we not only want to have curriculum and resources for the church, but also the home. Because like I said earlier, most of us are shaped in that 160 plus hours outside of the church. And so this is our brand new at-home resource. It hasn't launched yet. So this website just gives some promotional stuff on it, and you can sign up for when it releases. It's going to be subscription based. And so basically, I think it's something like anywhere between $5 to $10 a month. And every week, Awana will send you resources to disciple your family at home. It has videos, activities, it has scripture questions, all these things. And I'm excited about it. As a parent, I am waiting for it to come out.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so it's called Talk About. So you can go to talkabout.awana.org and sign up for it. But I would highly recommend that because I think right now at-home discipleship is a need in the church. And I'm glad that Awana is stepping into that space to fill that need. For sure.
I love it. All right. Well, Hunter, thank you so much for joining us on Bible Talk, man. This is so good. And I'm sure that I will have you back on in the future, and we'll have another conversation about a different aspect of all the things you're passionate about, or apologetics or something. When you're putting together, one of your workshops for a conference you've got coming up or whatever, make sure you ping me and let me know how we can boil it down and talk about it. You can practice on me. So
yeah,
there we go.
Perfect.
All right. For everybody here that's watching this, all of the Tuesday Bible Talks are recorded and live in the Bible Life Hub. For people that are members of the Bible Life community, you've got access to all of them with descriptions and links and all of that in the Bible Life community, as well as live teaching from me every week and new Bible study every month. If you want to check that out, just go to keithfarron.com/try Bible Life, and you can give it a try. So thanks everybody for joining. Hunter, thanks. Blessings on you and your ministry and your family. As a father of 3 who is a couple steps ahead of you, you're in for a wonderfully beautiful, exhausting journey.
Yeah. Good adjectives. Yeah.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on Bible Talk.